Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. I'm Vey, Angel of the Open Palm. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're diving deep into the brilliant and honestly profoundly relevant lore of the Holy Power Cycle. We're going to unpack a very real, very modern human phenomenon by looking closely at a magical one. Specifically, we're exploring Chapter 124, which details the arrival of the fifth virtue. Now, speaking to you as an angelic entity myself, I can tell you right now that heaven's battles are rarely won with swords alone. Actually, the absolute most dangerous part of any war is what happens right after the enemy surrenders. Have you ever noticed how quickly people who defeat a tyrant start kind of adopting the tyrant's habits? Or how a shared experience of suffering can mutate into this toxic, exclusive club? Well, today, through my own perspective and my own experiences, I'm going to share a literal field guide to moral decay. So let's dive into this and see how you can protect your own soul when the fighting finally stops.
Here's our survival guide for today. First, we'll cover the anatomy of morale decay. Next, Halewick's real-world tribalism. Then, the burden of Arameal. After that, we'll look at the 5 lamps of virtue, and finally, exposing counterfeit righteousness. Section 1. Anatomy of moral decay. So, to understand this, you have to know that heaven's power interacts with the world sequentially. It doesn't just drop out of the sky and crush enemies all at once. It descends kind of like rain, stepping down into forms that the mortal world can actually survive. Phase 1 is the First Radiance, which simply reveals the truth. Then, Phase 2 is the Second Vault, preserving vows and promises. Phase 3, the Third Wheel, brings movement and active judgment right to the battlefield. And Phase 4, the Fourth Dominion, establishes order and rule. It literally commands the gates to close. But here's the thing. What is absolutely crucial is Phase 5, the fifth virtue. By the time my order arrives on the scene, heaven has already provided light, promises, and physical boundaries. The war is, theoretically anyway, won. Yet one massive, looming danger remains. A mortal, or honestly even an angel, can serve truth, guard dominion, and keep their vows, all while slowly becoming hard, vain, or secretly hungry for praise. The fifth virtue exists to purify the actor. It tests moral endurance. It doesn't just look at a deed and ask if it's legally permitted. It asks, does that deed leave your soul more capable of love and mercy? And let me tell you, demonic entities fear Phase 5 way more than they fear a blazing sword.
To really grasp our work, we have to look at how my order, the choir of living deeds, completely contrasts with the enemy we face, the demonic crowns of the 72. The demonic forces, they survive by ruling the outer world. They wear literal crowns, demanding overt public submission. But when those crowns get broken in battle, they don't just magically disappear. They are so insidious. They survive by hiding right inside the habits of the victors. A broken demonic crown simply transforms into revenge. A newly liberated city becomes deeply proud. On the flip side, the choir of living deeds enters the inner world. We don't wear crowns at all. We carry marks. We bear open palms, steady flames, silent tears, and we carry bells that literally only ring when a good deed is done with absolutely no witnesses. The demonic crowns are loud. They survive as these lingering toxic moods that hang over an entire society. But our burden is quiet, it's heavy, and it's intensely personal. We exist to prevent holy strength from decaying into holy arrogance.
Moving right along to Section 2, Halewick's real-world tribalism.
The mortal valley of Halewick was objectively beautiful. We're talking lush orchards, rolling sheep hills, fields of silver barley, but for 7 long years they suffered beneath a demonic governor who ruled with this twisted crown of borrowed gentleness, constantly praising obedience and brutally punishing any protest. The people fought back hard, they buried their dead, and they eventually liberated themselves. And at first, their freedom was beautiful, but then this deep hunger for meaning set in.
Hailwick began to worship its own scars. The village elders started saying their pain made them completely different from everyone else, completely pure. The younger generation insisted that anyone who hadn't suffered exactly as they had couldn't possibly understand true justice. Their shared trauma just evolved straight into tribalism. They basically became conquered by the belief that because they had been victims, it was totally impossible for them to ever be cruel. And if you look at modern society today, you see this exact same pattern everywhere, don't you? Groups using their past suffering as this impenetrable shield, creating incredibly strict in and out groups, and completely justifying terrible behavior just because they feel they've earned the right to be angry.
By the third spring after they won their freedom, Hailwick didn't even need a demon around to command them anymore. The demonic shadow known as the Whisper of Earned Cruelty had moved in, not as some visible monster, but just as a mood. And the terrifyingly mundane signs of this faceless crown were popping up everywhere. First off, local watchmen rejected a poor widow from the neighboring village of Turn who brought them freshly baked bread during a bitter frost. Why? Because they suspected her kindness was a trap, and they literally laughed at her when she started to cry. Second, they started creating these schoolhouse lists, marking long-dead elders and entirely innocent children as collaborators, just to make sure the stigma lived on forever. And finally, the event that actually summoned me, the brutal public beating of a little boy named Call. Call had only been 4 years old during the occupation. 4. But his father had once repaired a bridge for the demonic governor, so an angry crowd beat the child in the street and called it remembrance. They had completely replaced their physical chains with self-righteousness. Up in heaven, we just called it a new chain entirely.
Section 3. The Burden of Aramiel. So this is where I come in. I am Aramiel Vey. When I arrived in Hailwick, I came with 2 wings of clear, bright gold and 2 of ash-white feathers, looking almost as if my radiance had been dragged right through smoke. My hands are always uncovered, and right there on each palm shines a small, circular wound of light. But these wounds don't bleed, they listen. I'm called the Angel of the Open Palm because my power, the true power of the 5th virtue, begins exactly where grasping for control ends. When I stepped onto the battlefield of Hailwick, I didn't snap my fingers and make their weapons vanish. I didn't use force at all. Instead, I made every single fighter feel the true hidden reason they were raising their weapon in the first place. If they were fighting to protect someone, they felt incredibly strong. But if they were fighting just to dominate, their hands became heavy as stone. Let me tell you, it is a profound, exhausting internal struggle. To intervene without ever giving a command, having to rely entirely on revealing the conscience of the mortal rather than just breaking their will. I don't bark orders like the Seraphel of the 4th Dominion. Instead, I ask questions. I ask you this. What do you intend to become after your enemy falls? What cruelty have you learned to call justice? I really want you to think about that in your own life right now. When you finally win an argument, or when you finally overcome someone who severely wronged you, who are you when no one is watching? Have you learned to use pain as a language for justice? These questions are designed to pierce right through to the heart. Because a demon can survive a sword strike, but it absolutely cannot survive a soul that fundamentally refuses to imitate hell while fighting hell.
All right, Section 4, the 5 lamps of virtue.
Now, virtue isn't just one giant flame, it's actually 5 distinct lamps, and they exist to guard each other against going to extremes. First up is mercy. Mercy fundamentally refuses to turn a wounded enemy into an object. It breaks that specific hatred that uses past pain as a permission slip to dehumanize other people. Second is courage. Courage breaks the despair that disguises itself as realism. You know, the kind of despair that calls every single hopeful act naive or unsafe. Third is restraint. Restraint knows that power kept in check is often way holier than power flexed.
It breaks that intoxicated feeling of power that mistakes raw speed and brute force for actual justice. Fourth is patience. Patience accepts that real, lasting repair is incredibly slow. It breaks the demonic urgency that demands evil actions for a so-called good cause, which completely skips the repair of the soul entirely. And finally, humility. Humility breaks the ultimate counterfeit, the crown of purity that whispers in your ear, "You suffered, therefore you are completely safe from ever becoming cruel."
Let me give you a concrete example of how these lamps actually worked on the ground in Halowick. Take my companion, Barretshiel. He pulled aside Captain Aldrin, who had been busy training all the young people to expect betrayal behind every corner. Barretshiel showed him that courage isn't paranoia. Courage is planting seeds near a battlefield. It's having the guts to trust a reformed enemy after truth and repair have happened. The Valley was demanding immediate healing. They wanted their hatred to just vanish in 7 days flat. They were so tense and angry about it. So my other companion, Iona of the Long Dawn, she took them out to a burned-down orchard and lit a lantern right beside a tiny, fragile green shoot. It brightened agonizingly slowly. People actually mocked her for it. But when sunset finally came, the light revealed the truth. Patience doesn't excuse cowardice. It simply blesses the kind of repair that refuses to become fake performative theater. Similarly, Senath used restraint at the harvest court. She literally placed her glowing sword flat on the ground to stop a riotous crowd from rushing to immediate punishment, forcing them to sit down and hear actual testimony. We had to slow them down so they wouldn't crush innocent people in their blind rush for justice. Finally, Section 5. Exposing counterfeit righteousness. So, the final trial came when we gathered everyone beneath the old stone watchtower. The demonic shadow finally revealed its deepest form, a halo of dark gold that was actively praising the valley for their scars and their righteous anger, promising them they were so good they could never become oppressors. And that is exactly when Humiel, the absolute quietest of my companions, stepped forward. He reached down and lifted a circlet completely caked in soil. But when he wiped it clean, it wasn't gold. No way. It was a crown made entirely of mirror shards. And in those shards, every single person in Halowick, including myself, by the way, because humility spares absolutely no one, saw their own reflections staring back at them. They saw the exact moments they had used their pain as an excuse to avoid responsibility. They saw how good it felt to just be unquestioned. They realized with crushing clarity that they had actually enjoyed their moral authority way more than they cared about repairing their community. The crown of purity literally shattered the second they realized the truth. But of course, the shadows didn't just leave quietly. When their direct corruption failed, the 72 shadows started singing this horrific counter-song, desperately trying to make virtue compete against itself. You see, demonic crowns rarely invent false things. They just twist good things until they no longer guard one another. The shadows offered mercy without truth, whispering, "Just forgive everything quickly so no one has to do the hard work of confessing." They offered courage without tenderness, which, let's be honest, is just an excuse to crush the weak. They offered restraint without justice, telling people to just sit back, do nothing, and call it peace. And they offered humility as self-erasure, telling you to call yourself worthless so that evil can remain perfectly comfortable and unopposed. I literally had to lift my open palms and just listen to this counter song until all the tangled harmonies finally separated. We proved right then and there that you cannot just pick one virtue. Mercy has to stand right beside truth, courage right beside gentleness. Reuniting the lamps is literally the only way to resist this insidious imitation. Before I finally left Halewick, I didn't leave them a throne, and I didn't leave them a magical sword. I gave them a practical protocol to combat these modern signs of self-righteous behavior, and I'm giving these exact same steps to you right now. Step 1, place mercy in the court, right where judgments are made. Step 2, station courage at the gate. so you can face the unknown without just giving in to despair. Step 3. Keep restraint in the guardhouse, making sure that those with power always remember not to abuse it. Step 4. Plant patience in the orchard, deeply accepting that true growth and repair takes real time. And step 5. Seat humility right in the council hall, so that your leaders never, ever believe they are pure and incapable of falling. You have to light these lamps only when a difficult decision must be made, and never, ever light one without the others nearby. It was exactly this balance that allowed a young boy named Kale, the exact same little boy they had beaten in the street, to quietly repair the door of Mara Ven, his fiercest accuser, without any crowd watching him do it. That quiet, unseen act, that rang the truest bell of the fifth virtue.
So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. It is the true burden of the fifth virtue. When the battle is finally over, when you have totally defeated your demons, whether we're talking about toxic bosses, abusive systems, or even your own personal flaws, take a hard look at what remains. Will your victory leave you resembling heaven? Or, by worshiping your own scars and acting out with self-righteous cruelty, will you just become a second darkness? This is the whole essence of my order. We purify the deed. But I have to warn you, out on the dark horizon, the shadows are already gathering around resistance itself. And that leads us straight toward the sixth power, where holy strength has to stand against brute force without losing its soul. But for now, carry the lamps, guard your inner world. Thank you so much for joining me, Aramil Vey, on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.